As you've probably seen by now, China just had a massive parade that included Xi and Putin talking about the human organ black market, the great leader looking as glowing and portly as ever, and an array of new weapon systems and vehicles that may or may not be popping up on the combat footage subreddit by the end of the decade. I want to highlight a few of the more notable developments, really focusing on the new stuff rather than just the old stuff that maybe have gotten a fresh coat of paint. We'll talk about what we do know about them, what we don't know about them, and what it could mean for China's military as a whole. I've also timestamped everything down in the description, so you can skip ahead to whatever part of the video you want to look at specifically, because this might get a little long. Social credit the like and subscribe button, and let's talk about it. But first, super quick, I need to talk about today's sponsor, the USCCA, a gun owners organization with over 860 members. By joining, you'll gain access to the Protector Academy, a secure online platform backed with reading material, video lessons, digital books, and more. Most importantly, you'll gain access to their network of legal representation and self-defense liability insurance. When you're forced into a self-defense situation, and even if you did everything right, it's still going to cost you your time, money, and could still potentially land you in jail. With the USCCA's trusted legal reps, you can carry knowing that you're not just physically protected, but legally too. If you want to support the channel, make sure to sign up today using the link you see on the screen and that you see down in the description. Thank you again to USCCA for sponsoring the channel, and now back to the video. The first vehicle on the list that we will be talking about is the Type 99B, which, according to the announcer, has striking abilities powered by information. So that settles that. I guess moving on to the next thing. But actually, the 99B is the successor to the 99A. No shocker there. And the 99A is China's primary main battle tank, their version of the Abrams for us Americans. Like most incremental upgrades, these look very similar to their predecessors, but we do have some changes that we do know about. The 125mm gun still fires the same kind of round, but can apparently now fire at higher chamber pressures. In a loose sense, that means potentially longer ranges and better accuracy. However, with modern fire control systems, aiming a tank is actually a lot easier than aiming a rifle or pretty much anything else. Plus, for the majority of rounds, the speed at which they hit their target doesn't really matter because it explodes when it impacts. So if I hand you a live hand grenade that is traveling at 0 feet per second, that is perfectly okay because it's still gonna explode no problem. But I would never do that to you because I love you. Never forget that. The only thing a tank actually fires that the speed matters are sabot rounds, because they are literally just solid darts. They do their damage by going fast as fuck, not by exploding. Increasing chamber pressure in the 99B means that these rounds can, theoretically, do more damage on impact. It's not useful, but increasing the chamber pressure on my tank gun would not be my priority upgrade if it were me. Plus, you would need to beef up the barrel to handle the extra pressure, and doing that comes with its own list of issues that make tank mechanics cry at night. China's ammo tends to be on the spicier side compared to, say, Russia, and I could see this upgrade being a fix to a problem like the guns were wearing out too fast, rather than making the tank deadlier per se. It might not be more deadly, but it might be more reliable. The entire tank has an overhauled AI-enabled electronic system that will help with everything from aiming, handling suspension, and talking to other tanks and infantry. A pretty standard upgrade in the 2020s at this point, and an easy way to get more effectiveness out of your tank without adding extra weight. These AI systems will also probably be controlling the new active protection systems that we're seeing on these. China's standard APS is the GL6, a hard kill system that intercepts incoming rounds mid-flight. Pretty standard stuff. The radar array is able to detect a full 360 degrees, but we don't know the full intercept angles of the actual interceptors, which is a big deal because javelins and drones typically do the top-down attack style of things. Now, some reports are saying that this is a new version of the GL6, and some people are calling it the GLXX, but the layout of the two launchers and 4 distinct radar units is still in line with the older models. It also includes extra ERA protection points and an upgraded engine, upping the performance from roughly 1,500 horsepower on the A model to upwards of 1,700 on the B. My notes say that this is the point I need to make a joke in the video, but I couldn't think of any puns surrounding active protection systems or horsepower. So what do you call a deer with no eyes? No idea, moving on. From what we do know so far is that the Type 99B isn't necessarily intended to fully replace the A model. Many of China's potential flashpoints are hard to get to even by lighter armor than a main battle tank, and with the new version being significantly heavier than the old one and designed to take a lot more punishment from complex environments, it's expected to take on a more elite vanguard role. That's not really something we have an equivalent of in the United States when it comes to armor, because everyone here pretty much uses the same stuff, but I'm sure they have their reasons. Before I show you more glorious footage from our Chinese comrades, I first want to say this, to keep in mind that parades are parades. They're not real life. They're basically propaganda events that you have to buy a ticket to go see. With that said, China is not Russia, and they absolutely have the industrial capacity to produce everything you're seeing at scale. And just because the flaming bowling pin t-shirt you ordered off of Temu evaporated after you tried to wash it, it doesn't mean they can't produce a tank that would blow my head smooth off. Somewhere on the spectrum of fetishizing Mao and making Wish.com jokes is the actual capabilities of these vehicles. However, that's an entirely other video. Moving on, we have the Type 100, and we saw hints of these during the rehearsals of the actual parade, and boy howdy did the internet have a heyday with this one. According to Reddit, this tank in Chinese rhymes with the Chinese word for Pepsi, leading some to call it the Pepsi tank, which, if my math is correct, means China is only a few years away from closing the Mountain Dew capabilities gap. Now, there are actually two types of Type 100s. One is a tank, and the other one is being called a support vehicle. We'll cover the tank first. Depending on who you ask, the Type 100 tank would be classified as a light or medium tank. It appears to have an unmanned turret, which I'm surmising because, unlike the Type 99, no one is actually popping out of it. These kinds of vehicles typically have crews of 3, a gunner, driver, and commander, but here we only see 2 crew members, and I would assume that's because the gunner is still in the hull, probably in the middle of the 2 other guys. It also makes sense to have an unmanned turret if you're going to use the same kind of chassis for multiple kinds of roles, because you only have to make one kind rather than multiple with different configurations, which at that point just makes it an entirely new vehicle. But my first question when looking at this was, how does this fit into the overall Chinese strategy? China already has a light tank, the Type 15, and it's pretty new. See, the PLA has a very real need for light tanks. The mountainous borders they share with India, and their terrain in general, does not favor tanks, especially heavier main battle tanks. And that's where the Type 15 comes in. If the Type 15 is there, it's probably the only tank in the entire AO. By engineering standards, it is a light tank, but would be serving more in the main battle tank role. The Type 100, by contrast, is more of a support for the standard PLA ground forces. Its role is closer to the now defunct M10 Booker or Striker MGS would play. It's ultimately a support gun, a mobile protected firepower to use an American phrase. It's brought up to engage specific targets like bunkers, light vehicles, or buildings. It's not designed to be at the front taking punches. That doesn't mean it's not protected though. We see 2 APS launchers on the rear of the turret and spaces for additional armor on the sides. In the center here, which you probably didn't need me to point out for you, is a combination commander's viewer and remote weapon system. Chinese state media is reporting this as an anti-aircraft gun, but really it's just a typical RWS. Theoretically, it could have something akin to the newer CV-90 radars that automatically detect and track something like a drone, but that's as far as I see this thing going. That size of a gun really isn't big enough to have programmable airburst munition for an anti-air or anti-drone role, so I doubt it's actually for that. Like the Type 99B, this has a lot of fancy new computer and networking systems. The crews also appear to be wearing some version of augmented reality goggles, and reports claim that this would allow them to see 360 degrees around the tank from the inside, similar to how fighter pilots can see around their plane. Some videos I've seen show the guy with the goggles on moving his head around with the gun itself tracking his head movements. That's something you see in American helicopter gunships. Now, I give it a 50-50 chance that there isn't just a guy controlling the gun and making it move so it looks like it's doing that, but also that kind of tracking isn't super useful for this kind of scenario. The guns in armored vehicles are stabilized, the human neck is not. If your gun is slave to the direction that you're looking at, it would wobble all over the place if you're moving even just a little bit. And it's also just a lot easier to aim and scan for targets with a joystick. An example is to watch people play Call of Duty with a controller, and then watch people play the same game but in VR. Honestly, I don't see any scenarios in which this is useful for a land vehicle, but if you can think of one, let me know. I might just be blanking out on this. The support version is a little more interesting. This is more of an IFV configuration, given the infantry popping up in the back. That, and it has a big autocannon on top. I couldn't find any specific information on this particular cannon, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was a new design, but in a familiar 30mm caliber. The tank version's 105 is different than the one found on the Type 15. Instead of copying essentially a Russian design, it's more of a domestic one. When it comes to IFVs, China borrows a lot from Russian BMP-style autocannons. But with this brand new design, I wouldn't be surprised if it was distinct as well. From one video, we can also see the differences in the form factor of the vehicles. The tank version appears to have a totally different rear, while the support version has a hatch and 2 sponsons for the infantry. These also come with their own drones, as we can see here, all nested on a nice little black frame docking station. We've only seen quadcopter reconnaissance style ones attached to these vehicles so far, but it would be pretty easy to swap it out for a counter UAS, interceptor drone, or an FPV kamikaze style one as well. Now, I highly doubt this is what it's going to look like in the real life. There are roughly 69,420 different ways your fancy drone could break if you just have it sitting on the back of your IFV in the open air. There will probably be some form of containerization implemented, but they probably just wanted to show it off for the actual parade. According to their current doctrine, however, Chinese infantry squads are being established with 2 or 3-man drone teams themselves, which to me infers that the drone that's attached to the Type 100 is going to be strictly for an ISR support role for the vehicle itself, while the infantry drones are the ones doing the actual killing and blowing stuff up. One final note on the Type 100 is that they have hybrid engines, and despite what rednecks say in the comment sections on Facebook, hybrid engines in tanks is actually a pretty smart move. Better gas mileage means you can fight longer and more reliably, and they're significantly quieter, making them harder to detect as well, as we've seen in some videos like this. I do think it's funny how whenever the US military brings up hybrid tanks for vehicles, everyone whose profile picture looks like this gets really angry about it, when in reality it will literally help us kill stuff even more. So remember kids, critical thinking is important. Afterwards, China then showed off a bunch of vehicles we've already known about, and this video is getting longer-winded than I expected, so we're going to skip ahead a little bit. The next thing we're going to talk about is actually 3 separate vehicles that all share a common hull, and by this point I'm sure you're picking up a theme. China showed off 3 platforms specifically designed to be airdropped from a Y-20 cargo aircraft, according to PLA reports. The crews jump alongside the vehicles and hop in once they land. These are significantly beefier than what China had been using prior to this, that being the ZBD-03 system, but since the introduction of the Y-20 in January of 2013, it opened the door, or the back ramp in this case, to better armed and armored vehicles because of the increased payload capacity of the plane itself. The first of these had a small turret with dual machine gun grenade launcher combo, kind of like an unmanned version of the turrets on the old Marine AAVs. Except on the side, they also had a set of missiles. This appears to be more on the APC or battle taxi version, if you want to call it that. It's built primarily to carry troops and potentially provide lighter fire support for the dismounts. The next in line was the full IFV version, with an unmanned 30mm cannon and 2 separate types of missiles, and this would inevitably be doing more of the actual fighting. We did see dudes popping out the back of these, so there is a hull at the very least that could carry more than just the crew. But unlike the APC version, this appeared to have a top rear hatch, and that's going to be used for reloading the missiles on the side. This could also carry a squad of troops, hypothetically, and the point of showing both the APC and IFV versions in a parade could have been just to show that it was a flexible, modular platform. It also could point in the direction that the one with the bigger gun on top would be used for other tasks, perhaps as heavy reconnaissance, similar to the Marine LAV-25, or how the Army used to use the M3 versions of the Bradley for screening missions, while the M2s carried more troops for the infantry. The final version appears to be a heavy mortar version, something the PLA forces didn't have before. It also is much simpler in a configuration compared to the other 2. There's not nearly as many bells and whistles. It has no active protection system, extra armor, and only sports a simple manned machine gun on top of the turret for self-defense. That makes sense. Mortar turrets and their ammo are heavy as shit, and that's a problem if you want it to be carried in a cargo plane. And secondly, unlike the first two, these are not going to be in the front line duking it out with an enemy force. They're going to be in the back and keeping it as light as simple as possible, because that also means they can shoot and scoot a lot better to avoid things like drones or counter battery fire. You don't need to protect yourself from a rocket if you're already gone by the time the rocket gets there. Now, not new necessarily, but visually interesting at least, were the giant trucks carrying giant missile pods and lasers. I won't be covering all of these because there are a metric fuck ton, but we'll go over some highlights. This giant box is actually fake. It's a mock-up of the HQ-10 missile pod. These are already in service, so while these are fake in the parade, real ones do exist and are already deployed. HQ-10s are actually point defense interceptor missiles for Navy boats. Think of them as giant active protection systems you'd see on tanks. Why have them here? I don't know. Looks cool though, but not as cool as the giant lasers that followed them. These are the LY-1s. Like the HQ-10s, these were originally designed for naval ships. However, the chonker of a truck these are mounted on would allow for mobile ground-based defenses near sensitive areas like naval bases or airstrips. These would be ideal for larger drone attacks, something like a Shahad-style one that fly low and slow to the target. You could just easily fire a missile at these, but using a laser is A, more accurate, B, essentially has unlimited ammo, and C, keeps the actual economic cost of intercepting air targets at sustainable levels. If I launch 1,000 cheap drones at your base and you spend tens of millions of dollars trying to shoot them down with munitions that take months to build, I still win even if I don't hit anything. Napoleon famously said that armies march on their stomach, but that's because he didn't have to deal with the post-Cold War military-industrial complex. Smaller lasers were also showing off, specifically the OW5-A10. Where are they getting these names, by the way? Someone please explain that to me, because at least in the US, we have the decency to just put an M in front of something like 90% of the time and calling it a day. Names aside, these would be ideal for small individual FPV drones. If you string enough of these in a row, integrated along with other ground forces, you can essentially create bubbles that, while they don't guarantee a drone won't blow you up, the drones at least won't have a 100% success rate. Next on the list are these giant microwave weapons. We've known China has been dumping money and research into using microwaves as weapons in the past few years. Now, unlike the thing that does the heavy lifting of the cooking of my food these days, these are really good at frying electronics. I mean, I would imagine my kitchen microwave is also good at frying electronics, but I'm not going to let my iPhone 6 die an undignified death like that just to find out. Microwaves are area weapons, rather than lasers, which are point weapons, meaning they could blanket the sky rather than have to engage one target at a time. Lasers work by literally just melting whatever it's shooting at, while microwaves can skip the melting part and directly attack the electronics of the thing, which is both faster and easier. The trucks we see them being carried on would not be able to power them, not even close, so it's more likely these are going to be containerized and stationary near assets that themselves are mostly stationary. Of course, this wouldn't be a video about militaries in 2025 without talking about new drones, and good lord did they show off a lot of them. First was the VU-T2 ground drone, sporting a machine gun and missiles on the side. These style of UGVs are typically attached directly to lighter infantry units, and are used for providing cover fire in dangerous areas typically. Next came a larger unknown wheeled one that looks more like a small IFV than a drone. It came with the same armament, but the bigger size overall suggests that this would be attached to a heavier mechanized or armored formation, because with the increased size not only letting it carry more ammo, but it would physically be able to see and engage targets further at ranges that would be more useful for the other vehicles it would be supporting. Next was another tracked drone that is kitted out for engineer support, specifically for clearing mines or obstacles, which, if you didn't know, is one of the most dangerous and hardest tasks of any unit anywhere in the world, something the US itself is heavily investing in. A few other ground drones were shown off, like the dog-style ones, and ones that would be used by troops for transporting stuff around. Next came a giant drone by drone standards, or tiny submarine by submarine standards. It just kind of depends on who you ask. These are unfortunately not going to get the attention they deserve by the general population because they're basically just black tubes and aren't kill streaks in Call of Duty. But underwater drones, especially like the ones that are essentially just torpedoes with brains, have the biggest impact in terms of target disproportionality. What do I mean by that? Well, an FPV quadcopter is orders of magnitude cheaper than the tank it would destroy. But that cost discrepancy pales compared to what something like this could do to a naval cruiser or aircraft carrier, especially if you have a handful of them going on at once. These style of drones have allowed Ukraine to essentially go toe-to-toe with Russia's navy, despite them not having an actual navy. Next came an entire drone boat, which I think is a funny thing to show off at a land parade, but that's just me. This has the ability to be manned or unmanned, depending on what it is you want it to do, along with an autocannon at the front. And this thing's going to be used for littoral areas and patrol, and that would include everything from hunting American subs in the South China Sea to clearing mines off the coast of Taiwan. Probably the most visually striking drone was the GJ-21, a subsonic stealth strike drone that bears a very strong resemblance to the US Navy's X-47B. That doesn't mean it's a straight copy per se. The physics behind stealth works don't change depending on what hemisphere you're in, but on the flip side, you are not going to convince me that this is not just a copy of a Predator or Reaper drone. Let's get real here. The next set of drones were massive stealth drones that appear to be designed for supersonic flight. In my opinion, that entails that these are set to be loyal wingman style drones or collaborative combat aircraft if you want to get all autismo about it. The idea behind these is that your fancy stealth fighter now becomes a bit of a mothership for these. The wingmen will be the ones actually punching into enemy airspace, taking out targets, or performing missions that would generally be too dangerous or too difficult for a human pilot. China has been showing off what many are calling their 6th generation fighter, so their version of the American F-47, and one of the requirements that makes a 6th generation plane, at least informally, is the inclusion of these integrated drone systems. Now, there was a lot more shown off in this parade, specifically in the missile department, but there were so many kinds and types that this video would be 2 hours long and have a 0% retention rate. But I've included some videos down in the description that go more into depth if you want to know more about those. So what is the ultimate takeaway of this parade? What does this tell us about the state of the PLA and China's overall strategy? Well, the first is the obvious: more drones and missiles. And that's something that basically every country with a military budget above $5 is doing right now. That itself is not revolutionary. But what about the stuff that's more unique to China? Well, one theme is a common chassis for multiple vehicle types. This would allow them to increase production numbers and keep overall costs and logistics down. It could be a military decision, it could be an economic decision, it could be both. The decision doesn't directly point to an action or a strategy on the ground, but it does mean in a loose sense that it would up China's ability to pump these out faster at macro scales. One interesting thing, at least to me, is more emphasis on their traditional land and airborne forces, not necessarily the forces that would be specifically used in a beach landing. That could mean a number of things. It could be because China realizes that defending an occupied Taiwan is just as important as taking it in the first place. It could be a shift in strategy based on lessons in Ukraine that favor lighter, more mobile forces. Or it could just be that the fact that the stuff used for beach landings and island hopping is still pretty new, while their conventional ground force vehicles are older. If we look at this through the lens of Russia expected a quick special military operation and has now been slugging it out for years, focusing on the non-marine portions of your military for China could be a result of that lesson. Airdroppable tanks are really good for rapidly establishing a defensive in an area, and the most obvious example to that would be defending against American landing forces on islands. Because landing forces are themselves generally lighter, it would mean the lighter, less powerful airborne vehicles would do just fine against them, and would mean you could defend a larger area at once, rather than trying to strategically spread out your forces and leaving gaps in your defensive line. But like I said, this is a parade. We had our own parade recently, and I like to think the idea of parades not showing off the reality of your military goes both ways. We'll see though. And on that note, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.